My name is Harper, and I'm 27 years old. If you'd told me a year ago that my entire sense of family would shatter in a single evening, I would have laughed it off. But the truth is, sometimes the cracks have been there for years, and all it takes is one night for everything to finally break. That night started with a text from my mom. Family dinner, Sunday, 6 p.m. Everyone's coming. No explanation, no hint of what was waiting for me. Just a command, like always. I almost didn't go. I'd spent the week buried in deadlines at my UX design job, barely sleeping, barely eating, just trying to keep my head above water. But something in her message felt different, urgent, final. So I went, telling myself it was just another dinner, just another night of pretending to fit in. When I walked into my parents' house, the first thing I noticed was the noise. Laughter, clinking glasses, the low hum of 33 relatives packed into a space that suddenly felt too small. Folding chairs lined the walls, borrowed tables crammed with casseroles and store-bought pies. Everyone was dressed up, like they were attending a wedding or a church banquet, not a family dinner. As I stepped inside, the room went quiet for a split second. Heads turned. Eyes landed on me, then slid away. No one hugged me. No one said, "Hey, Harper, glad you made it." A few people nodded, but most just went back to their conversations, as if I was a stranger who'd wandered in off the street. I should have left right then. Every instinct told me to turn around, get back in my car, and drive away. But I didn't. I found the only empty chair at the far end of the table, next to the kitchen door, half in the shadows. I sat down, trying to make myself small, invisible. The food was already being passed around, but no one asked if I wanted a plate. No one made room. I just sat there, hands in my lap, listening to them laugh about promotions, weddings, baby showers. Every milestone I apparently didn't qualify for. My mom, Diane, was at the head of the table, her smile tight, her eyes scanning the room like she was taking attendance. My dad, Gerald, sat beside her, arms crossed, jaw set. My older sister, Mallory, was in the middle of a story about her school's new counseling program, her voice bright and practiced. I watched them, feeling like I was watching a play I'd never auditioned for. Then, without warning, my mom stood up. She walked over to the wall where all the family photos were lined up, years of Christmases, graduations, barbecues, all staged and smiling. She reached for the frames with my face in them and, one by one, ripped them down. The sound of glass clinking against the table made everyone go silent. She tossed my pictures into a trash can they'd conveniently placed right beside the table. Then, in a voice loud enough for everyone to hear, she said, "You're a leech, Harper. You've sucked this family dry for long enough." My dad didn't stop her. He didn't even flinch. He looked straight at me and said, "You owe us. Every dollar we ever spent on you was a wasted investment. It's time you paid us back." My sister shoved her chair back, got up, and motioned toward the door like she was escorting a problem customer out of a store. I didn't cry. I didn't argue. I just picked up my bag, walked out of the house they'd just erased me from, and called a ride back to my apartment. They thought that was the end of it. They had no idea I'd been quietly tracking what they were doing to my name and my credit for months, and that this dinner was the last push I needed to turn their perfect little show into the kind of legal revenge they'd never see coming. If you want to know how an outsider daughter turned one humiliating dinner into the night her parents finally paid for everything they did in the dark, stay with me until the end. When I got back to my apartment that night, my hands were shaking, not from what they said, but from what they'd just confirmed. They didn't see me as a daughter anymore. I was a line item, a debt, something they thought they owned the receipt for. I dropped my keys on the counter, kicked off my shoes, and went straight for my laptop on the kitchen table. I didn't text anyone. I didn't post anything. I opened a blank document and typed one sentence at the top in all caps, so I wouldn't forget why I was doing this. This is not about hurt feelings. This is about what they did to my name. While the screen glowed in the dark apartment, I started rewinding everything I knew about my family. My mom, Diane, is a senior loan officer at a local credit union just outside Austin. The kind of person who likes to remind you she understands money every time you try to make a decision without her. My dad, Gerald, co-owns a heating and air company. He's proud of having built it from nothing and even prouder of reminding me how much it cost to raise me. My older sister, Mallory, is the guidance counselor you see on school brochures, all soft smiles and inspirational quotes on Facebook. We are the Brooks, the polished Texas family with matching Christmas sweaters and staged pictures at every barbecue, graduation, and church event. Offline, it's always been different. When I told them I was going into UX design instead of accounting or nursing, Diane called it a phase and asked when I was going to get a real job. Gerald would joke in front of everyone that I was the artistic one, which in his voice meant the irresponsible one. Every choice I made that didn't match their script became a debt they thought I owed. In college, Diane insisted I open a joint account with her, just to help manage your bills so you don't mess up your credit. Back then, I was 19 and exhausted and signed whatever she put in front of me. She set up online banking on my laptop, saved all the passwords, and told me not to change them because I'm the one fixing things when you forget to pay. Years later, after I moved to Austin and got my own place and my own job, she was still the one who had my social security number memorized, still the one who insisted my mail should go to their house because it's safer. I thought it was just controlling. I didn't think it was criminal until the letters started coming. A few months before that dinner, I got a notice from a bank I'd never heard of, thanking me for applying for a personal loan. I assumed it was junk mail and tossed it in the recycling. Then another envelope showed up, this time about a new line of credit. Around the same time, the free credit score app on my phone pinged me with a drop that didn't make sense. I was paying my one credit card on time. I was on top of my student loans. Nothing I was actually using explained that dip. I screenshotted it, meant to call someone, and then my week filled up with deadlines and meetings, and I let it slide. That night, after the dinner, I did not let it slide. I pulled up annualcreditreport.com and requested my reports from every bureau. While the files downloaded, I made myself sit still, breathing slow, letting anger burn off just enough so I wouldn't make sloppy mistakes. When the PDFs opened, it felt like someone had turned on harsh fluorescent lights in a room I had only ever seen by candlelight. There were accounts I had never seen before, opened in cities I had never lived in, all tied to versions of my name and my old address at my parents' house. Small personal loans, a store card, a line of credit that had been maxed out and then rolled into a consolidation loan. The dates lined up perfectly with the years I had been too busy to read every piece of mail they forwarded to me. The mailing address on almost every account was my parents' home. The phone number on several was Diane's. For a second, I just stared at the screen, waiting for some other explanation to appear. It didn't. I made a new folder on my desktop and started dragging everything in. Credit reports, screenshots of the alerts on my phone, photos I had taken of old envelopes when I thought they were just weird spam. I took out a notebook and started writing down account numbers by hand, circling every one that listed my parents' address instead of mine. Then I went to the government website for identity theft and followed the steps one by one. I filed an official report describing how someone with access to my personal information and my old joint account had opened lines of credit without my consent and had them routed through an address I no longer lived at. I answered every form like I was talking to a jury. After that, I placed fraud alerts with each credit bureau, then initiated a freeze, locking down my file so no one could open anything new in my name without jumping through layers of verification. Only when all of that was done did I open my design software. If there was one thing I knew how to do, it was take a messy story and make it impossible to look away from. I laid out a simple infographic, nothing fancy, just clean icons, bold numbers, and short lines of text about how identity theft can start inside your own family. I didn't put any names in it. Not mine, not theirs. Just patterns, warning signs, and one quiet line at the bottom that said, "This happened to me." I saved it under a generic file name that didn't scream revenge, exported it, and stared at the finished image. They thought keeping everything in the dark would protect them. I was done leaving anything in the dark. The next morning, my phone looked like it had been in a car crash. The lock screen was just a wall of missed calls and text previews stacked on top of each other. First, it was my dad around 5 a.m. call after call like he thought he could drag me back into their house by sheer persistence. Then my sister started in 20 missed calls by 7, a string of messages about how I had embarrassed everyone and how I owed mom and dad an apology. By 10, my mom had joined the chorus, not with rage like the night before, but with paragraphs that started with, "We need to talk calmly about this," and ended with, "Please pick up just once." I stood in the kitchen in an old t-shirt, watching the numbers climb. Every buzz made my chest tighten, but I didn't open anything. I just took pictures of the notifications one by one and saved them to the same folder where I had put the credit reports, receipts, patterns, proof that they only reached for me when they needed something or when they realized they had finally pushed too far. I made coffee, sat down at the table, and opened my laptop again. The infographic I had finished last night was still on the screen, all clean lines and simple colors, quietly screaming, "This can happen inside your own family." I uploaded it to an anonymous account I had on a big discussion site in a subreddit about personal finance and credit. The post title was simple: "My family used my identity for years. Here's what I wish I had noticed sooner." I attached the image, typed a short caption about someone close abusing access to my information, and hit post before I could overthink it. Then I did the same thing on LinkedIn, but toned down, framed it as an educational piece about red flags and the importance of monitoring your credit. I removed anything that could point directly to my parents. I wasn't interested in public drama. I was interested in pressure. For a while, nothing happened. I answered a few work emails, pushed a prototype update to my team, pretended my life wasn't on fire. Then the notifications shifted. People started commenting, asking questions, sharing their own stories of parents and spouses opening accounts behind their backs. It was equal parts comforting and horrifying to realize how common this was. One DM stood out. The username was a generic handle, but the message felt strangely familiar. "They thanked me for posting, said the layout made it easy to understand, and then added one line that made my skin prickle. Some of this sounds exactly like what my sister has been doing to the family." A minute later, another message came in from the same account. "Harper, is this you?" I froze. There aren't many people in my life who know I do both UX work and side design projects, and even fewer who would recognize my layout style from a single infographic. I stared at the screen for a long second before typing back, asking who it was. The reply came almost immediately. "It's Janine, my mom's older sister." The accountant. The one who always seemed a little bit on the outside of family pictures, like she'd been cropped in at the last minute. She asked if we could talk somewhere that wasn't in the group chat Mom used to blast holiday invitations. We switched to a private call. I walked out onto my tiny balcony while the morning traffic hummed on the street below. Janine's voice sounded tired in a way that had nothing to do with age. She said she'd seen my post on LinkedIn first, then found this same graphic reposted on Reddit, and something in her stomach dropped. She told me how a couple of years back, my mom had helped her restructure some debt after a rough patch with her freelance clients. She said she'd signed a stack of documents because Diane told her it was just consolidating credit cards into one payment. Janine figured it was easier to let the money person handle it. Recently, though, letters had started coming in about a loan Janine swore she had never taken. When she asked Diane, my mom brushed it off as a clerical error and told her to ignore it. As Janine talked, I opened another new file and began typing every detail she gave me. Names of banks, approximate dates, the amounts she remembered, the words my mom had used. At one point, Janine stopped and asked very quietly, "Harper, did she do this to you too?" I told Janine everything. About the credit reports, the accounts I'd never opened, my name tied to their address years after I'd moved out. I could hear her breathing on the other end of the line, the slow inhale of someone realizing a suspicion they've had for a long time is finally being confirmed. She said she'd never trusted the way Diane pushed herself into everyone's finances, but had convinced herself it was just Diane being controlling, not criminal. I thought I owed her for helping, she admitted. Now it feels like I paid with interest I never agreed to. We agreed she would scan and email every piece of paperwork she could find, every letter from collectors, every error Diane had told her to ignore. When we hung up, I had a new stack of puzzle pieces and a very clear picture forming in my mind. This was not just about me. This was about a pattern. My phone buzzed again with a call from my dad, then from my mom, then from a cousin. I let it ring out, watching their names flash across the screen. For years, they had acted like I was draining them. Now I was starting to see how many people they had quietly drained to keep that image of a successful, generous family alive. I turned my ringer off, opened my files, and started building a timeline that did not care about holidays, bloodlines, or hurt feelings. It only cared about dates, amounts, and signatures. Mallory texted me 2 days later like nothing truly catastrophic had happened. She sent a single line first, asking if I could meet her for coffee near downtown to talk like adults, as if I had been the one ripping pictures off the wall. I almost ignored it, but she followed up with, "It's about mom and money. Please." That second sentence did what 33 relatives screaming at me could not. It made me curious. We met at a cafe a few blocks from my office, the kind of place with plants hanging from the ceiling and overpriced cold brew. Mallory was already there, sitting in the corner with her school lanyard stuffed into her purse, eyes shadowed like she hadn't slept since the dinner. When she saw me, she tried to smile, but it fell apart halfway. I sat across from her, hands wrapped around a mug just to keep them still. For a minute, we just existed in the same space. Two people with the same last name and no idea how to talk to each other without pretending everything was fine. Finally, she said she was sorry about the way things went at the dinner. Not sorry for what she did, just sorry it got out of hand. She blamed stress, the economy, the pressure on mom and dad, as if any of that explained being shoved out of your own family like you were crashing a stranger's party. I let her talk until she ran out of excuses. Then I pulled a folder from my bag and slid it onto the table between us. Inside were copies of my credit reports with every account I did not open highlighted. I told her I was filing for identity theft, that fraud alerts were already on my file, that regulators and the bank were going to start asking questions she was not going to like. Her face went pale when she saw her parents' address over and over next to my name. She tried to tell me Diane had just been helping, that mom knew how to get better rates, that this was how families worked when they trusted each other. I asked her when exactly trust started to mean signing someone else's name on a loan. That shut her up. I pointed to a mid-sized loan opened 3 years ago. Another credit line rolled into a consolidation, all using my old joint account information and my social security number. Then I showed her the email Janine had forwarded to me. The one where mom reassured her that a mysterious letter from a lender was just a mix-up and to ignore it. Mallory read it twice, eyebrows pulling together in a way that looked more like recognition than shock. When I asked her straight out if mom had ever used her information for anything, she hesitated just long enough to answer the question without saying a word. Finally, she admitted there had been a couple of times mom had handled things for her, too. Times when Mallory had been busy starting her new job and didn't want to deal with paperwork. A small consolidation. Mom had called it a harmless cosign on a refinance. Mallory had signed a few pages because mom had told her where to initial and where to date, and that was easier than reading every line. As she talked, I opened my laptop and pulled up another copy of my notes. I asked Mallory if she remembered the bank names, the rough dates, any amounts. She did. Too many of them matched the lenders on Janine's letters and the ones attached to my file. It started to look less like separate favors and more like a system. The more Mallory dragged old memories up, the more they lined up with a pattern I was already sketching out in my head. Mom would show up during a crisis, offer to fix things, collect signatures when people were tired or overwhelmed, and then redirect just enough money to cover whatever she and Dad wanted to do next. Whether that was paying off business debt or remodeling a kitchen. When I mentioned Grandma Marion, something flickered across Mallory's face again. She said Mom had been the one to handle everything when Marion sold her house and moved into the independent living community. She had gone to every meeting, filtered every call, brought a neat little check to the moving party, and told everyone the rest had gone to fees and taxes. That had never sat right with Mallory. But every time she tried to ask questions, Diane snapped at her for being ungrateful. I typed while Mallory talked, building a rough timeline. Year 1, I start college, open a joint account with Mom. Year 2, Janine hits a bad season with clients. Mom steps in. Year 3, Grandma sells her house. Year 4, Dad's HVAC business suddenly has a new work truck and a remodeled office. On paper, it was all just numbers. In real life, it was favors, guilt, and a long history of Diane reminding everyone how much they owed her. When I told Mallory I had already filed with the FTC, her eyes widened. When I mentioned that Mom's own credit union would be forced to investigate once they saw how many loans connected back to their employees' relatives, she finally stopped trying to spin it. For a few seconds, she just stared at the table, then quietly asked what I planned to do next. I told her I was going to talk to a lawyer, not to sue the family for fun, but to protect myself before their mess completely burned down my financial future. If that meant dragging the whole rotten structure into the light, then that was what it meant. Mallory swallowed hard and said she would send me every email, text, and screenshot she had that involved Mom and money, especially anything tied to Grandma or Janine. She admitted she didn't want Mom to go to jail, but she was also tired of living with this sick feeling that something was wrong and she was helping hide it. As we wrapped up, my phone buzzed again with a text from an unknown number containing one blurry photo. My dad standing next to a classic-looking HVAC truck, grinning with a beer in his hand. The caption read, "Funny how fast that upgrade showed up after Grandma sold the house, huh?" It was from my uncle on my dad's side, the one who had always half-joked about Gerald forgetting where the family money came from. I showed the picture to Mallory and watched the last piece of denial slip from her face. On the bus ride home, I sent an email to a consumer rights attorney whose name had come up several times in threads about financial abuse. I attached a summarized version of my timeline, the documents I had so far, and told them in plain language that what had started as a humiliating family dinner had turned into a trail of signatures, loans, and missing money that all seemed to lead back to the same two people. My parents thought they had used that night to publicly cut me off. What they actually did was hand me the last clue I needed to follow the money all the way back to them. A week after I met Mallory, my mom showed up at my office like she was dropping by for lunch. I found out because the receptionist slacked me, "Hey, there's a woman here asking for you. Says she's your mother. She looks intense." I walked out to the lobby, and there she was in her best work blazer, hair perfectly sprayed into place, clutching a leather folder like she was about to sell someone a mortgage. She smiled wide when she saw me, the same smile she used on neighbors and church people. "Harper," she said, standing up like we were two professionals meeting for a friendly check-in. "Can we talk?" I glanced at the receptionist and at the cameras in the corners of the ceiling and said we could talk right here. No closed doors, no private conference room. My mom didn't like that, but she sat down anyway. She started with an apology, the kind you give when you're more worried about appearances than damage. She said things had gotten heated at the dinner, that everyone was emotional, that she didn't mean every word she said. She kept circling back to how hard things had been for her and my dad, how much pressure they were under, how ungrateful it felt when I walked out in the middle of a family gathering. I let her talk until she showed her real reason for being there. "I saw something online," she said, voice dropping a notch. "Some infographic about families and identity theft. People are talking. I need to know what you've been saying about us." There it was. Not, "Are you okay?" Not, "Did I hurt you?" Just, "What are you telling other people that could make my life harder?" I told her I had posted an educational graphic about what can happen when someone abuses access to another person's financial information. I reminded her I had not used names, not mentioned locations, not pointed to anyone directly. But I also told her I had filed an official identity theft report and put a freeze on my credit. I told her that banks and regulators would start asking questions about what she had done with my social security number and our old joint account. The color drained from her face. For a second, She dropped the nice tone. Do you have any idea what you've done to my career? She snapped. To this family? I told her I had a very clear idea what she had done to my credit and to Janine's and probably to Grandma's. Long before I clicked submit on any report, I pulled a printed summary from my bag and slid it across the coffee table, the one I had made for the attorney I was talking to. It wasn't everything, just enough to prove I was not guessing. There were dates, lenders, amounts, and the same home address appearing over and over. My mom stared at it, jaw tight. You don't understand how this works, she said, finally trying to regain control. I know people at these places. I know how to structure loans so they look good on paper. I did this to help you build credit, to help Janine, to help Mom. No one was complaining until you decided to make a spectacle out of it. I reminded her that helping someone usually involves telling them what you're signing them up for, not forging their signature, and then telling them to ignore letters from collectors. I mentioned the email Janine had where my mom called a serious notice a clerical error. I mentioned the timeline of money that flowed into her accounts and Dad's business right after major life events in the family. Her eyes flashed. For a moment, I thought she might actually yell at me in the lobby. Instead, she leaned forward and lowered her voice, which honestly was worse. You are my daughter, she said, like that gave her some legal authority over my existence. We do not take each other to court. We do not drag family business in front of strangers. You want your credit fixed? I'll fix it. I will make a few calls, move some things around, but you need to stop whatever you've started. Take down whatever you posted. Tell whoever you talked to that it was a misunderstanding. Behind her, my boss Trevor had stepped out of a meeting room and was pretending to check his phone. He was close enough to hear every word. I looked my mother in the eye and told her no. I was not deleting anything. I was not calling this a misunderstanding. I was not going to help her keep this buried just because she was afraid of what it would do to her job title. She sat back, eyes cold now, and said, if this blows up, it will hurt all of us. Do you really want to be responsible for that? I told her she had that backward. She was the one who had been signing her name on other people's lives for years. I was just finally writing my own. She stood up fast enough to knock the leather folder against the table. You're making a mistake, she said through her teeth. When this comes back on you, don't come running to me. She walked out of the building without looking at Trevor, heels clicking on the tile like a metronome. After she left, he walked over and asked if I was okay. I told him a slightly sanitized version, just enough to explain there might be some uncomfortable phone calls coming to the office. Instead of backing away, he offered to loop in our company's legal counsel if my mom tried to show up again or if anyone started harassing me at work. That small gesture, someone believing me on the first pass, felt like oxygen. Over the next couple of weeks, the ripples started to spread. Janine sent me scans of everything she found. Loan documents with suspicious signatures, payoff statements that didn't match what she remembered, emails where my mom told her not to overthink the numbers. My attorney forwarded some of the information with my permission to my mom's credit union's compliance department. They were already looking into her because of the identity theft report and how many loans were linked to her relatives. Now, they had more than red flags. They had a pattern. A state investigator called me to ask follow-up questions about my complaint. It wasn't dramatic. No flashing badges or movie scenes, just a calm voice walking through dates and accounts, double-checking that I hadn't authorized any of this. Every time I answered no, I could feel something heavy shifting a little bit more in my favor. At night, when the anger kept me awake, I worked on something new. The infographic had done its job, but I wanted a place where people could find concrete steps if they were going through the same thing. I built a simple website from scratch. Nothing fancy, just a clean landing page explaining how financial abuse and identity theft can happen inside families, links to government resources, and a section where I broke down my story into anonymized case study pieces. I did not mention my parents by name. I did not have to. The facts were ugly enough on their own. I watched the traffic to the website slowly tick up as people shared the site in forums and group chats. Some of them were strangers. Some, I realized, were relatives. A cousin I hadn't heard from in years emailed me from a personal account saying the layout of my case study felt uncomfortably familiar and asking whether I thought she should pull her own credit reports. I told her yes. Meanwhile, the texts from my parents shifted from anger to silence for days at a time. Nothing. Then a burst of messages from my dad about family sticking together and outsiders trying to tear us apart. The outsiders he meant were investigators and auditors who did not care about our last name. He was right about one thing, though. Something was tearing us apart. It just wasn't the people asking questions. It was the answers. It took a few months for everything to catch up with them, which somehow made it feel even more real. This wasn't some dramatic movie scene where cops burst through the door right after a big speech. It was slower, quieter, like a fuse burning under the floorboards. First came the formal letter from my mom's credit union, the one she had bragged about working at for over 20 years. I got a copy through my attorney. It said they were conducting an internal review into multiple loan files connected to her and might be reaching out to me for verification. A week later, a different envelope showed up from the state regulator's office requesting permission to use my complaint and documentation as part of a broader investigation. I signed every form. I wanted every flashlight possible pointed at what they had been doing. I didn't see most of what happened next in person. I heard about it in pieces. The way you watch a house you used to live in be torn down from a few blocks away. Janine told me about her interview first. She said she sat in a conference room with 2 compliance officers and a lawyer, hands folded so tight in her lap they hurt, and walked them through every favor Diane had done in the last 5 years. The consolidation loan, the refinance, no one fully explained. The times Diane had told her to ignore letters because these companies make mistakes all the time. They showed Janine documents with signatures that didn't look like hers and asked if she had ever given Diane permission to sign for her. She said no. They asked if she had ever received the full amounts those loans said she had. Again, no. Grandma Marion's part came next. She was too frail to sit through long meetings, so her lawyer arranged a deposition at the Independent Living Center. From what he told me later, Marion cried when she saw on paper just how much money had gone through Diane's hands when her house was sold. There were proceeds she had never seen and fees no one had explained. She had trusted her daughter to look out for her. Instead, it looked like Diane had looked out for herself and for Gerald's business first. Somewhere in the middle of all that, my dad decided to try his own kind of damage control. He called one afternoon and launched into a speech about outsiders trying to tear the family apart, about investigators who didn't understand how families help each other out off the books. When I told him calmly that forging signatures and rerouting loan proceeds wasn't helping, he switched tactics and asked if I could just tell them it was all a misunderstanding, that I had overreacted. I said no. He hung up on me. The official fallout started with my mom's job. Her credit union put her on leave, which was their polite way of saying, "Don't come back while we figure out how deep this goes." Coworkers she had known for 20 years were suddenly auditing loans she had personally processed. And a lot of those loans had familiar last names. Cousins, in-laws, my own. The pattern was not subtle. Then there was a civil case. Janine and my grandmother's lawyer filed a suit, not just against Diane, but against both of my parents, arguing that they had benefited from money obtained through fraud and misrepresentation. My name was in the filings, too, as a victim of identity theft and unauthorized credit accounts. My attorney asked if I wanted to be there in person for the first hearing. I thought about it for a long time and said no. I did not need to sit in a courtroom and watch my mother pretend she didn't recognize her own handwriting. Instead, I signed an affidavit, swore it in front of a notary, and let my documents speak for me. Mallory went. She texted me afterwards saying she had never seen Mom look so small. Diane and Gerald showed up with their own attorney, dressed like it was Sunday at church, not the beginning of the most humiliating chapter of their lives. From what my lawyer described, their defense was exactly what I expected. They leaned hard on the idea of family arrangements, on verbal promises, on helping relatives through tough times. They suggested that misunderstandings and sloppiness, not intent, had led to the mess. But every time they tried to frame it as a series of accidents, there were numbers that didn't match, signatures that looked wrong, and timelines that were a little too convenient. Money flowed in right when their business needed a boost, right when they wanted to upgrade a truck or fix up the house, right after another relative had signed something they didn't fully understand. The investigators in the court didn't care about holiday photos or church attendance or who brought what to Thanksgiving. They cared about documentation. They cared about the way my mom's login showed up on loan files tied to relatives. The way her notes in the system mentioned strong relationship with borrower, while those same borrowers like Janine sat across from them and said, "I did not agree to any of this." Eventually, the credit union made their decision. They fired my mom for violating multiple internal policies and reported her to the state. Her license was suspended while they decided whether she would ever be allowed to work in that field again. All those years of bragging about being the one who understood money ended with her escorted out of a building she once treated like her second home. On the civil side, my parents settled before it could get worse. They agreed to pay back the money that should have gone to Janine and Grandma, plus additional damages. They agreed to have every loan they had opened in my name and Janine's name unwound and removed. They did it not because they suddenly found a conscience, but because their lawyer explained that fighting it would open them up to even more scrutiny, maybe even criminal charges if the wrong prosecutor took interest. They didn't have the cash to cover it all. So, they did what people like them always swore they'd never have to do. They sold the house in the suburbs, the one with the wall of family photos that no longer included me. They sold the miracle truck my dad loved posing with. They sold off a chunk of his company, bringing in a partner who, according to one of my cousins, made it clear he was there to fix the mess, not protect Gerald's pride. News travels fast in a family like ours. Some relatives were furious with me at first, convinced I had overreacted, that I had gone nuclear instead of keeping things in-house. Those same relatives went a lot quieter once letters arrived at their doors, encouraging them to check their own accounts for irregularities. A few of them reached out privately to thank me, even if they would never say it out loud at a reunion. The last time my dad called me, it was late, his voice rough. He said I had destroyed everything, that the family was broke, that Mom might never work in her field again, that people at church were whispering. He told me he hoped I was happy, living my little independent life while they suffered. I listened to him rant until he ran out of words. Then I told him the only thing that felt true. I didn't destroy anything. I just stopped covering for what they had been doing for years. The hole they were standing in was one they had dug themselves. I had just finally stepped out of it. He went quiet for a long time after that. When he finally spoke, his voice was smaller. He said he never thought it would go this far. I told him it had gone this far the first time my mom signed someone else's name on a loan. The only difference now was that someone had finally turned on the lights. A few more months passed, and the version of my family that existed on social media and in my childhood memories finally stopped matching the one that existed in real life. Word filtered back to me in pieces. My parents had moved out of the big house in the suburbs and into a cramped rental on the edge of town, the kind of place you drive past without really seeing. The yard my dad used to obsess over was gone. The wall of framed photos had been boxed up. The neighbors they'd impressed for years barely got a goodbye. My mom tried to keep up appearances for a while, dressing for job interviews in the same blazer she had worn to my office, but doors kept closing. It turns out, terminated after internal investigation, doesn't look great on a background check for financial jobs. She picked up part-time work wherever she could, nothing close to what she used to brag about. My dad kept a share of the HVAC company, but it wasn't really his anymore. The new partner came in with spreadsheets and conditions, not family dinners and handshakes. From what an uncle told me, Dad hated answering to someone, hated having to justify every expense, hated that people whispered about why he suddenly needed to sell off assets in the first place. For the first time in my life, the consequences were landing on them instead of on the people they leaned on. Mallory ended up transferring to a different school district after rumors started swirling about her parents. She sent me a long text one night saying she was angry and embarrassed and tired of feeling like she had to choose between being loyal and being honest. She didn't apologize for that night at the dinner, not directly, but she did say she understood now why I had stopped laughing at family jokes years ago. I told her I didn't need her to pick a side. I just needed her to stop pretending that what happened was normal. We are not suddenly best friends, but there is less static between us and more quiet honesty. Janine and I talk more now than we ever did when I was growing up. She sends me pictures of her dog and updates about Grandma Marion, who is doing physical therapy and budgeting her money on her own terms for the first time in a long time. Grandma wrote me a shaky letter thanking me for not letting them make me small. She said she wished she had spoken up sooner in her own life. I keep that letter in the same folder as all the ugly documents, a reminder that not everything that came out of this was destruction. Some of it was correction. As for me, my life did not magically turn into a montage. I still pay rent, still answer to a boss, still fight with my own anxiety some nights, but my credit reports are clean now. The fraudulent accounts are gone. The freeze is still in place, this time by my choice. I got a small raise at work, not because of what happened with my family, but because I showed up, did the work, and refused to let their chaos drown me. The website I built about financial abuse and identity theft inside families started getting more traffic than I expected. People I will never meet email me to say my case study helped them stop a parent from opening a loan in their name or gave them the language to talk to a spouse about money. On weekends, I take on a few extra design projects, turning dense legal information into something ordinary people can actually understand. It feels like taking back something my mom twisted and using it for the opposite purpose. I wish I could tell you there was a neat happy ending where my parents apologized, meant it, and we all ate some awkward but healing holiday dinner together. That is not what happened. They are still angry. They still talk about me like I burned the house down instead of pointing out that it was full of leaking gas. Maybe that will never change. What has changed is me. I don't measure my worth in how much approval I can squeeze out of people who only see me as an investment. I don't hand over my passwords, my signature, or my peace of mind just because someone shares my last name. If there is any lesson in all of this, it is that love and loyalty do not mean letting people use you as collateral for their bad decisions. You can care about your family and still protect yourself from them. You can be hurt and still choose to go through the front door of the law instead of sneaking around in the dark. And if you have even the smallest feeling that something about your finances doesn't add up, you are not paranoid for checking. Pull your reports. Ask hard questions. Write things down. The people who really love you will want the truth just as much as you do. The ones who don't might call it betrayal when you finally turn on the lights. But sometimes turning on the lights is the only way to see who's actually standing next to you and who's just been using your shadow. If you found this story helpful or eye-opening, please like, subscribe, and share it with someone who might need to hear it. And if you've ever felt like an outsider in your own family or you're worried about your financial safety, remember, you're not alone and you have the right to protect yourself. Thanks for watching.